preparing to live stream your meeting.
Here it goes. And now
Okay.
here's my message. Okay. And I just accepted. Okay.
All right. So it's got the little thinking bar.
Okay.
And now
It's
streaming live on YouTube. Okay. So
perfect. I see it too in the
all
corner.
right. Well, it looks like we may be live. So hello. Hello. I have anybody who's watching. And hello, Christine.
Hello, Leslie.
It's
Good
nice
to
to have
see you
you.
again.
Yeah, good to see you too. Thank you so much for being open to having this discussion and trying out this live thing.
Yes, I absolutely. I mean, this is great. I love trying new platforms and ways of getting information out and being able to have wider discussions that way. So I hope we can continue to do this and just bring more awareness to what's going on in our field.
Absolutely. And, you know, I was, you and I talked, well, it must have been late October when we first connected. It was like right after I put out the video about my experience at Antioch.
Yes.
And we connected because you were a professor at Antioch.
Yes.
And was that the California campus in person teaching?
Yes.
Okay.
It was the in-person until COVID, but in person really primarily. And it was at the Los Angeles location, and the Department of Clinical Psychology pretty much funded almost all the other programs. It was extremely popular. It's a very, very popular program in the area. Yeah. And so other programs were able to kind of hang on that may have not had enough funding because we were able to do that. So it was, you know, it's recognized as being a pretty thorough and you know, high standard program of clinical psychology, teaching people how to be psychotherapists rather than focusing on researches and researching papers and studies and all that. So it's kind of looked at in a pretty high regard in the field.
Yeah, that is something I wanted to ask you about, because that was my impression as well. I've had a lot of feedback from people in the comments on some of the videos that I've made saying, why did you choose Antioch in the first place? They've always been so radical. But I didn't think that they were. I felt like there was a real shift. And I wonder how long were you teaching there? What was your experience of that?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because I went to school there. That's another piece of this sort of puzzle, right? To kind of talk about how the shift happened, because I also, as a student, knew what Antioch was like in 2004. So where are we? That's almost 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So
wow.
that's, I think I rolled, 2004, 2005 for sure. So between there, 04, 05. So yeah, there was discussion, but I think, you know, the concept of what diversity was and what, you know, social justice or whatever, you know, they kind of packaged it more as a cultural competency. And the idea in the beginning, because I had to take the, you know, society and individual, the professor of that class, and that's one of the classes that have become extremely social justice oriented. It's just straight up activism now. Back then, it really wasn't to that extent. The professor that I had was one of the Little Rock Nine. So he was one of the first group of Black students to integrate into a white school. So he was just legendary, and he had just such an amazing, you know, life and history. And so that class, you know, there wasn't a competition about who has it worse or who had what experience or overall labeling or branding anything or anybody. We didn't use words like oppression. We didn't use words, you know, woke, obviously. We didn't use that. He was really interested in keeping us focused on talking about our experiences in the world as people that are complex, that have nuance, different shades of gray and different, you know, life is very rarely black and white in general. And so he really encouraged that. So there was a lot of support for that. It was about, listen, you know, now that you're learning about yourself and now that you are connecting and listening to other people's stories, that'll hopefully enrich you. hope broaden your perspective as a therapist. So great. And then, they start incorporating diversity, which in the beginning, again, it was all about, being aware that our way of thinking in the Western world, will say, may not be exactly the way people are, thinking that are from other parts of the world, other parts of even our own country. Right. So that was the idea, was to be curious and wondering and ask questions and learn, because, hey, you can't assume anything just by looking at somebody, right? Sitting down in front of you. You can't make these assumptions. So that concept was great. That concept
sounds very reasonable. That sounds like the way
correct.
that the way that I would have hoped things would have been taught.
Yes. Until it turned into some other bigger weaponization, if you will, but almost, I would say, that idea was exploited, I guess I would say, and exploited other people eventually. It was almost used as the backbone for a political movement, rather than for the sake of understanding that you're going to be seeing people who have different experiences than you. And let's talk about how that might show up in the room. That's how it was handled before. But it turned into, like I said, it's kind of this backbone of an actual movement in many ways.
It very much does. It seems like it's this core of something that we do need to address, that should be acknowledged, especially in this particular context. You're going to be working with people who are coming to you needing a place of trust and kind of a special relationship where you're going to be asked to understand lots of aspects of this person's experience and character and just their life. And so to have this thorough exploration of what it means to be a person and what the potentials are and the different backgrounds and even just demographics and how things can shift for people depending on certain life experiences and characteristics. So that has been it. All that nuance has been repackaged in this really black and white thinking. And I don't mean that that sounds like a bad pun, but I mean, it's
rigid.
Very rigid. Absolutely. So when did you start to see that shift?
So I was working in grief for most of, my career. I would say at least the early part of my career. So I was working in a grief support center, and I was kind of promoted up the ranks there. And part of that job entailed teaching about grief, the different model, not looking at what has been done, the stage model, but understanding grief through a totally different lens and, broader, experience to not kind of, I guess, minimize it into the stage process thing. And so, having had, my mom die when I was really young, I was in my early 20s from horrible illness, I understood grief in this really profound way because it had already happened to me. And so I was very much, and I went to a support group at the very same place that I went to go back and work at. So it was just one of my loves in the profession was really that particular area. And so I was really eager, to be able to work at a grief support center, the one I went to when I had my mom die, and eventually be able to teach about grief. So what we did is, we had tons of CEUs that we created, continuing education unit classes. We were training USC and UCLA medical students on how to talk about terminal illness and dying and death in a sensitive and direct way, compassionate, I should say, and direct way. So all of that was a part of, what we were doing. So I got an opportunity to teach quite a bit because of so much, the desire for therapists to get some kind of grief training, and we were providing it. So that to me was just, kind of a blessing. I loved it. So when Antioch, I guess it was around 2016 or 17, I had heard that they had decided to create a grief class, and they did. And so they came to us at our house where I was working initially and said, hey, we have this new class that we're starting, and we need a professor, and we know you're a grief support center, pretty good reputation, et cetera. Who do you have? Well, kind of one thing led to another, and I ended up applying for it. And then I think they'd hired someone. Anyway, long story short, they reached out to me a year later and said, listen, the person we went with before we spoke to you didn't work out. Can we meet you? So met with them. Great, wonderful. Okay, you're off and running. And I was able to develop the materials. There was already some curriculum there that I liked, but I had a lot of autonomy. So as an adjunct, in general, they had, there's a lot of autonomy. There was a lot of autonomy in how you wanted to teach. There was a lot of trust put behind the professors based on the fact that most of them are still practicing as well. So, so I walked, kind of in with that kind of mindset. And one of the big things was that we never ranked grief. We never said whose was worse or better. That was something that we really emphasized, even with the curriculum courses that we were providing to nurses and to social workers and therapists and all of that, people that are going to work with grievers. We were very clear that ranking pain is completely disenfranchising, that person's experience and all of those things. So being so hardwired to not rank pain and to not think about one person experiencing a death of a loved one being worse than another, because there's a lot of complicated factors around grief and when somebody dies and all of that. So I walked into that class in 2017 with that, that vision, that perspective, which I still hold dear. And in the beginning, it was fine. I mean, I taught the class, people were engaged, they loved it. I think my evals, I almost got 100%, on people's enjoyment of the class. The feedback was incredible. So they said, hey, would you mind filling in and teaching another class? And I said, okay, and I started kind of moving in that direction. Now, when I did first notice it was in 2017, even though I was teaching grief, I had heard some students on the break, I think, during one of my classes, talking about the protest, because at that point, that was April of 2017. So Donald Trump was just elected president. And just inaugurated in January. Here I am in April. And they started talking about all of these protests and the big, movement on campus for people to organize and to come together and to protest. And they were allowing, according to these students, they were allowing class time to be dedicated to that. So, hey, if you're feeling, like you want to protest, feel free to go and do that during class when you're training to be a therapist.
That's strange.
Completely strange.
Completely out of place.
Yeah.
Education.
100%. And so I kind of, kept that in the back of my mind. But it didn't impact my class directly. So I marched forward anyway. And I think by the time April rolled around, they weren't doing those protests anymore anyhow. It was just what they had done initially. So it really wasn't until I would say I became an affiliate. I went from an adjunct to an affiliate professor, which meant that I was actually then not just paid per class, I was actually on the payroll as a faculty member in the department, which means two things. Number one, again, it's just a salaried position. The second component is that you have to take on some students to advise. So everybody has an advisor and whatnot, right? So, and then you get an office in the psychology department. And that was when I really noticed the change, because as an adjunct professor, regardless of what, happens in and outside of the classroom, no one's really paying much attention unless there's complaints. Okay. So those people can come in, they can teach and leave. Yes, totally. So you don't have to get sucked up into anything you don't want to be sucked up into and whatnot. But once you become a staff person and you have an office in the psychology department, that's when you start to see some pretty frightening things. And so when that happened for me, I think it was 2018 at that point, the very first day that I went upstairs to go to my office, I saw signs plastered all over the walls that were, intolerance will not be tolerated, with like a, fist kind of, I don't know, I guess shape on on the flyers that they were posting. And then there
That
were
sounds
all,
like a joke flyer almost. That sounds like
yeah,
a joke for ages, that phrase.
yes,
But this
yes,
was serious. Yeah.
yes. And then you see promoting courses that are not even in our program, that are social, activism, social justice minded, courses and seminars that aren't even in the psychology department. So they don't really, it is not that department's job. It's not even appropriate to be promoting other seminars that have nothing to do with psychology to psychology students. It just doesn't, that to me was really and I could tell you, I felt a heaviness on my chest. And I think this is the first time I've ever said this out loud, even on a podcast or anywhere, but I felt in my body this heaviness on my chest when I walked in, to my office, and I was walking down the hallways and seeing all of these signs, and the flags for LGBTQ, all of that was just dominant, and you could feel the tension. I mean, it was really crazy. I would sit in my office, and sometimes in the hallway I'd hear, one of the core faculty, and they'd be arguing with another one about these social, like, the crises is what they were calling them, and the fact that we don't have democracy, and I mean, it was just nuts, and I didn't really feel comfortable listening to it. It just put me off, and like I said, I literally felt it in my body.
That heaviness that you felt, was it a sense of something's not right here, or
Yeah,
do you have words for that, what that was?
Yeah, it was something's not right here. Not everybody has a voice that's going to be allowed here. You better think before you speak, because there is one narrative, and that's what was just crystal clear to me, just right away. So I didn't feel like I would ever be protected. And
that must have been so strange, coming from the prior, the way that things had been taught when you were a student and when you were teaching, which was this inclusiveness of all kinds of viewpoints.
Yes.
And respect for different viewpoints.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and one of my professors, actually, interestingly enough, I didn't actually read when I was a student, I didn't read my evaluations at all. As long as I got credit for the class, I didn't. And this past 2 years ago, I pulled them out, and I just, for the sake of it, and I read them. And one of the best evaluations I got was from one of the core faculty in the psychology department, who runs a discussion series called Messy Conversations. I adored her, and I got this amazing, evaluation. So Messy Conversations, she launched this series. And what were the messy conversations? Well, it was any professor, of color, we are inviting you to come to like a roundtable discussion type of thing. It's how it was structured before COVID. If you're white, we'd love to have you, but we don't want to hear from you.
You just listen.
So you're just going to listen, and they're going to sit there and tell you what it is that, you're complicit in continuing to push through, how you are complicit in, systemic white supremacy, institutions, which is pretty much every single place you go. It doesn't matter whether it's the grocery store or it's JP Morgan, doesn't matter. So that
sounds like they call that difficult dialogues at Antioch now, I think, something like that. Some kind of idea.
Yes. And, and I think there's now one that was just done called in 2021 called Decolonizing Your Classroom.
Yeah. I saw that.
Yeah. And that's, so little by little, that's kind of where I saw things going, and I didn't feel comfortable talking to anyone. There was a lot of tension, and it didn't, people were not embracing each other. This whole idea of just, being inclusive
Mhm.
I'm going to put air quotes around that.
Yeah.
It's only inclusive if you
Mhm.
agree with whatever it is that this particular group is telling you to agree with.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
can't disagree with them, because then you get boxed over here as being either a racist or,
Mhm.
in some way you feeling toxic shame that you actually want to be white yourself. I mean, that's the type of stuff they were telling people of color. I don't even like the word people of color, but that's the kind of thing that,
Yeah.
they were
Well, it's
saying.
internalized white supremacy, right?
Internalized white
Or
supremacy.
internalized oppression,
Completely.
or yeah.
Yes. And,
Yeah.
it's, uh, and then masculine, then they started attaching like masculinity to that.
Yeah.
And, it was just starting to kind of show up in these different ways. And then I started to see it with students making appointments. Now, as an advisor, I had this caseload. So they'd make appointments to come in and plan their classes, and I'd get to know them. Some of them I had in class too. And I had a few white males
Mhm.
come in and say, hey, what would you be my advisor? And I said, sure, but what's wrong? Well, my current advisor teaches a class, and in that class, I'm made to feel small, I'm made to feel unimportant, and that I don't have a voice
Mhm.
because I'm a white man, and I'm getting beaten down on pretty much every class, and I don't feel like I can say what I truly think and feel.
Mhm.
And this whole thing is really uncomfortable, but you don't appear to be that way, is what he
Mhm.
said.
Mhm.
And I never brought up those words in my classroom, but it was apparent probably
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
the way I taught, that I didn't hold that same values. I hadn't even heard of the word woke until 2018,
Mhm.
when I heard my boss actually using the word at the time.
And what kind of a way?
So,
Time were
yeah.
they embracing it?
Yes. So I
Okay.
had, well, and again, interestingly, and she was a mentor of mine when I first started in 2017. She had recommended that I show particular video. This was for a different class. By that point, I was doing the grief classes and all of that, but now I was starting to teach other core courses for the curriculum. And she suggested I use this one documentary to talk about, to have the students create like a vignette, right? So a case vignette, but it's based on a documentary versus us, as the professors writing up a case, that the students have to diagnose, they have to, go through the entire assessment and then provide treatment recommendations, all of that. So this documentary was used in place of that because it focused, interestingly, on a very poor white family.
Okay.
And she said to me, she did not want to, and I suggested some other possibilities. And she said, you can use some other possibilities, but I don't want to further the narrative that only Black people are living in poverty and only Black people have suffered and that they're victims. And she said,
Okay.
I don't want to support that. And I said, that's a really interesting approach. Okay, so you don't want to make this all about that. So I felt it made sense to me, and that she
Mhm.
doesn't want to further the narrative that they're the only group that suffers or has suffered.
Mhm.
That class it plays a role here, economic class, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Socioeconomic status. So that was great. So, cut to a year later, I'm teaching a group therapy class, and the students are, forming their little therapy group and practicing how they would be co-leaders. And one of the students in the class had written in his reflection paper that he thinks I hate men. And he wrote it directly to me saying,
Okay.
I think you hate men
Hmm.
and you want to punish men.
Hmm.
And I found that quite interesting, because this never came up in the group, but it did
Hmm.
not come up with the professor,
Okay.
um, that this man felt that women, if you will, have become anti-man or
Mhm. Mhm.
anti-masculinity,
Okay.
whatever it was.
Yeah.
So I brought the reflection paper to my boss, who was his advisor, and I said, what do you think about this? I don't know if this guy's ready to be a therapist. I mean, this is quite a reaction. And she
Okay.
said, oh, well, I'm his advisor now. And he wants to change to a Black advisor. And I'm his advisor now. And I said, oh, well, what happened? And she goes, well, he's woke now. And that's the first time I heard the word.
Oh.
And I said, woke. And I sat
Huh.
there and I mean, immediately just knew what she meant. And I thought, oh my
Huh.
God, wow. Okay. So now everything that you kind of wanted to kind of just debunk a little bit, you're
Mhm.
actually now reversing, taking a step back and going in this other direction.
Hmm.
That's when the major shift, and that was probably 2018-ish,
Okay.
maybe. And I
Mhm.
thought, okay, I don't like where this is going. And I made a comment to her about, well, maybe it would be helpful for him to stay with his advisor. Maybe he might learn something,
Mhm.
have conversations with somebody that is different from him. Maybe that would be helpful. And she goes, absolutely not. No one knows what it's like to be Black other than Black people.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, true. And this is a psychology program. We're not here to talk about what it means to be anything. And
Yeah.
like it had no
This
place.
is like that trigger warning thing where we
Yes.
tailor
Yes.
everything to everybody's
Yeah.
little, yes, we're going to coddle
Yes. We're
students
just
and
gonna,
make sure that
yes.
they have a curated experience instead of
Yes.
learning the way that the program that they entered wants to teach them.
Yes. That's
Yeah.
a beautiful way of putting it, a curated experience. And to see her make that shift, that was very clear to me then that now the walls were going to start kind of closing in here.
Interesting.
But they still gave us autonomy. And I still had these students, and eventually I ended up getting hired full-time as a full-time, faculty, which was sort of this coveted spot because I only have a master's degree. And unless you have a doctorate, you can't really be a core faculty at any school. But there is this, in the private school system, this layer called teaching faculty, and they will allow for you to have master level professors. So there are a lot of people vying for a position, and I got it, and I hadn't even been working there that long, but people love my classes, and that was great. So I felt very honored by that, and I loved to teach. I fell in love with it. Just absolutely loved posing difficult questions and posing scenarios, and really helping people kind of dig into the work. So I loved that. Now, as a faculty full-time, now I'm getting access not only to all the stuff that's on the walls, it's like promoting, these, how to de-white your classroom, and, the colors of the flag.
Classroom, yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Wow.
All these in messy conversations where you learn about this racial trauma, and kind of all of that was already on the walls. To now I'm now on the email lists. Now I'm on the internal email for full-time staff. So now I'm seeing what they're actually really saying on email paper, and what their new mandates were. So, I saw they had a political position that they made very clear when Biden was inaugurated. The email that we got, and that was during COVID, we were working from home. The email that we got is that now we're going to restore our country to sanity. Now,
so that's a really strong position.
Yes, they have absolutely no business in telling anyone, how to vote, who they should vote for. Like, where have we
Well, that's the whole idea of democracy, is that people are supposed to have a choice. But when they make it such a blatant attempt to influence and control your take away your democratic choice.
Yes. 100%.
That's stunning to me. It's been stunning to me about this school for the past several years.
Yes. So it only escalated from there. And then there were a few, kind of a couple of shootings and some terrible crises that happened. And the school's position, again, on email, again, just specifically internal, was about, and then they had the ones that they sent to the students, which said similar things. Actually, in this one regard, was that the previous administration, so Trump's administration, is the reason that we're all seeing these shootings all over the place now. And we have a lot of work to clean up from a polarized country that pushed white supremacy. And thank God, we're really grateful that President Biden is going to work on, eliminating racism and unifying us and all of this. And so everything that happened that year was blamed on Trump. And I'm thinking, why are we having a conversation on email about Biden's position, and then Trump's whatever he did to destroy the country, their perceived ideas of what he did.
Yeah.
It's all perceived,
Mhm.
and so why is this going out? And that's when I realized I'm not going to be able to teach here. This is just not going to happen. But I kept going. And the final, I guess, email that was sent was about, okay, so George Floyd died, obviously was killed 2020.
Mhm.
And that's, a lot of the radicalism at Antioch really blossomed at that point. But,
Mhm.
and I was teaching a class that very same day. And it was just, people were, wanting to go into kind of these political places. Anyway,
Mhm.
it was rough. Okay.
Yeah.
But when the anniversary came around, that email that came out was about, okay, now as we're trying to heal from all of this division and racial trauma that's been inflicted upon people of color, BIPOC was initially it,
Mhm.
from the previous administration, we have every full faith and confidence that you as professors will be addressing issues of social justice in your classrooms and helping to be helping students feel that there's a more inclusive and equitable space. And we trust that that's what you're doing. It was never
Wow.
officially mandated,
Yeah.
but
It's like a partisan purity test.
bingo, that's
Yeah.
exactly what it was.
Yeah.
And I showed it to my soon-to-be husband and I said, no, this is a big no for me. I
Yeah.
can't do all this. This is not going to work. So I was infuriated, and I still kind of tried to, I pushed, I was outside of the box. That's the kind of professor I was. So I kind of pushed their buttons a little bit, and I said to them once, what would you do if your client voted for Trump? And they said, I absolutely can't work with anyone who voted for Trump. Like, you can't work with like 50% of the population then.
Well, this was you talking with the students or with
The
okay.
students. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So I would always be
That
the
was something that
push.
was said to me by,
Yes.
I pointed that out in one or two of my videos. One of my advisor said, and she was laughing about it. She's like, we're fully aware that, we're no longer training people who are going to be able to work with the Trump supporter.
Yep.
And so this was known.
Well,
This was,
mhm.
yeah.
It was known.
Yeah.
And so you can't speak the name.
No.
In Loyola Marymount, by the way, which is down the street from Antioch, required that all of the professors and faculty removed American flags from their classrooms. So
Wow.
that was a mandate. I have the memo from a friend of mine who worked there that they needed to take down all the flags. So even putting up a United States flag was considered to be racist, inflammatory, pushing white supremacy or
The flag
whatever.
of your country.
Yes.
That's all it symbolizes to them.
Yes, that's all. Yes. We need to hate this country. So when that stuff got inserted, I realized, and there was always a space on the evaluations that said, is this person, involved in social justice enough? And I didn't care for that. I couldn't measure it.
From the teachers measuring the students' involvement in social, really?
Yeah. So the evals started to, So the evals.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Are they familiar with, or are they showing competency in being able to work in a, social justice minded, I can't get the exact, I don't remember them, but and I had a hard time with the evaluations because that was always the one area where I thought, I don't know what you're trying to say here and what I'm supposed to be looking for. So just, okay, pass. I didn't get that. So that was already kind of, again, laying the groundwork, but as long as I had autonomy, I sort of pushed pushed the envelope a little bit, and I did what I wanted to do. But then the attacks started coming personally from the students, and that was no longer okay
against you. Okay.
Against me. So
what did that look like?
So I had one student. Well, so I showed, and I've mentioned this maybe on other places. I hope it's not too repetitive, but I had shown this video about a really interesting new model of treating addiction because addiction and treatment was also one of my classes that I taught. I worked at several facilities in different positions. I mean, I had been doing this for 18 years. I was in a lot of, populations and different kinds of jobs in this industry. So I taught that class. I loved it. Anyway, I found this amazing new model. There was a TED Talk that this woman, this fire department chief woman in West Virginia, was talking about this model of treatment for, they got a lot of calls for overdoses, things like that. And so she was talking about this integrated treatment plan that was helping reduce overdose and reduce, deaths in general, and also the increase in people actually accepting help for their addiction. I mean, it was just great. I mean, the numbers were great. And this was West Virginia. Well, it's mostly white, but it's like the poorest state in the country, and they don't all have plumbing. And I think a lot of people do that. My sister taught in West Virginia, actually, interestingly enough, for a while. There are students that had no plumbing. I mean, this is true. This is not so
extreme poverty.
Extreme poverty. Yeah. Absolutely. So, there were some really great, kind of tools, that this program she came up with. And so I really loved it, and I showed it, and, I showed it in the quarter before, and that class kind of made a comment about the fact that she's a white lady. So they didn't, really feel like they wanted to listen to her talking about this. But it was the class I taught after, when I showed that very same video, where it became very apparent I wasn't going to be able to keep pushing an envelope without getting eventually complained about.
Wow.
I showed it, and the outrage in the classroom. So, I mean, people, and we're on Zoom, so it's hard to control, but people are going on. You lost me the minute I saw a white woman walk on stage.
Oh my gosh.
Could you ever support what they're doing to save people from the opioid crisis, which is a white person disease, addiction disease? This is what they're telling me. Versus what you didn't do for Blacks during the crack epidemic in the 80s. It's not the 80s, people. This is 2022 or 21, what it was, 2020.
And you were a kid in the 80s. Come on.
Exactly. We can't reverse. Yeah. So they don't care about Blacks who are living in poverty because they didn't save them. Opioid crises are a white person's addiction. Wow. So compassion is flying out the window completely now. Now it's not only is it not compassionate, it's not even humanizing people that suffer from these conditions. So to tie it back into this whole first class I taught about not ranking grief, well, I could no longer do that. Now I started to have to rank it according to the school's position on social justice that they trust their faculty will insert into every class, which means that we need to look at all the ways in which a particular client is marginalized, disenfranchised, et cetera, intersectionality, all these fun words that they're coming up with. It's word salad, essentially. It's a way of ranking pain. That's just what I'm going to say. All those words are a way of ranking pain. That's what they're trying to say. So when I said this,
antithetical to what you were teaching.
Completely. Like even in the DSM, I think under life adjustments, right? The diagnosing manual, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, under adjustment disorders, I think the one that ranks the highest is actually for a parent whose child dies. That I don't know if that changed and has changed, but that was, I think, as recent as the DSM-4, followed by divorce, followed by job loss. Okay, so they even sort of rank loss and the pain, right? So we were having a conversation in my grief class, and I was telling them the story about this family who, was prominent and had a lot of money, and their kid killed himself. That was one. Another one who one of the children saw the dad murder the mom in the middle of the street in a beautiful area of, the San Fernando Valley out here. And so when I brought those two cases into the class, immediately I said, okay, so if the same thing happened to a Black parent, what would be the difference? Because at the end of the day, their parents whose children died, like that, the trauma.
Mhm.
Well, this person has access to more resources and that person doesn't.
Mhm.
So it's going to be worse for the person who doesn't. Okay, so now we're ranking pain and who deserves treatment based on the color of their skin, based on their gender, based on your perceived notions on what privilege means. I'm not saying privilege doesn't exist, but there's a perceived
Well, and
privilege.
the automatic assumption and
Yeah.
association of Black with resources, automatically, that's like when, what Biden's quote about, what did he say? Poor kids and white kids.
Yes.
I mean, that's, you didn't make, you didn't,
On.
you didn't you didn't address the resource access.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's an assumption. It's a,
Completely.
yeah, yeah.
And I
Very
worked at the Street
condescending.
Support Center. Right. People came to our center for free. We would arrange transportation. We went out and, did grief groups at schools so the parents didn't have to come to us. I mean, it was absolutely the most inhumane, I think, to say, to comment, to make that who cares about those white people and their kid who died? So what? They have money. Wow. Okay.
Well, and this is a counseling student.
Yeah. That was and that's the grief. Okay. The grief class I loved the most. I was the most expert in those. And, I just had the most fun teaching them and whatnot.
Yeah.
So that started to happen in my grief classes. And I've said to them, have you ever sat with a parent who's had a child die? They will tell you that they will give up everything they own and live in a shack in poverty for the whole rest of their life to have their child alive. Okay. So that at that point, it was now my love for teaching coupled with my love for teaching grief in particular has just been stripped at that point. And there was no coming back from that for me. In fact, we went on a break during the class and I had not set the timer, which I normally do. And I came back to the Zoom like 20 minutes late. I mean, I was so distraught, I think, when that comment was made that day, that when we went on break and I didn't check, I mean, it's probably some unconscious, defense, because I needed to get a hold of myself. And I went, and I didn't tell anybody this story, but I'll say it now. I went into the office where my, husband, soon to be husband, we're getting married in a couple months, but where he was, and I just cried and cried and cried. And I just fell apart. Wow. And I just said, this is just my love. And I've nurtured, this particular topic and this issue. And again, it's so close to my heart because I've, been through it. I mean, it's a profound experience and it's a universal one. All humans will experience it at some point,
What a loss for you. I mean,
yeah, it was horrible.
And you built that curriculum, you loved teaching, and you're watching it just be sort of stripped apart by these intolerant, like ideologies, these people who are now, and the thing that is really striking about what you're saying, and it aligns with my experience and with what I've heard other people say, is, this isn't just coming from the faculty. It's not just coming from the school. It's surrounding, it's in the students. It's being cultivated in the population. And that's really stunning.
100%. Because one of my other job responsibilities was admissions, doing admissions interviews. So on our criteria of whether or not we're going to accept, a student or not, one of those big points was how socially conscious are they? And if you do not socially conscious, social justice consciousness, it was something like that. Are they conscious of the social justice, issues that we're facing and these crises that we're having in the systemic, racism, it's pervasive. And so that was a determining factor. And if they didn't say anything about it or had no experience to share about it, they would not be accepted. You could be a student that was applying that had, I don't know, not a single, just their essay is, you're reading it like a kindergartner wrote it. Okay. It just clearly did not, they probably couldn't handle graduate level work. But if they answered that question about social justice consciousness in the way that the administration wanted, that was an immediate acceptance. immediately. So I pushed people through the system to become therapists that I did not believe, correct.
Oh, wow.
Several that I did not believe belong there. I myself, because eventually, you start kind of getting, you start choking on the Kool-Aid. I don't even want to say drinking the Kool-Aid. It literally is like choking.
Yeah.
And you're starting to think, maybe this is true. What am I missing? Oh my gosh. Okay. But this feels awful.
Well, when you're drenched in it like that and it surrounds you
Yes.
everywhere, it becomes normal to you.
Completely.
And even if you still don't agree with it, it feels
Yes.
like there's a weird sort of like learned helplessness.
Yes. Which is my tagline on the first video I did, is about this learned helplessness idea. And that was just, so, I mean, I was passing people and doing everything that everybody else was doing in order to not get complained about, in order to keep my job, all that stuff that people get worried about. You can't really talk about heterosexual white male sexuality in human sexuality class.
No, it's called cis heteronormativity, and it's very
there you go.
Cool. Yeah.
And I had a couple of, again, white male students come to me that were like floundering because of these things. And so, I had multiple, issues with my neck, surgeries, whatnot. So the final surgery I had, after number 4, my doctor was like, you need to just not work for a while, because I was going right back after my surgeries. So I stopped for a while. That is when it was so clear that I will never be able to return to Antioch University to teach ever again, ever.
When you got away from it.
Yep. I was away from it for long enough that I started to think about what I was doing, what I was saying, what I was allowing to happen in my class, what I was allowing in terms of admissions, what I was allowing in terms of, what the school promoted, that I had to go into class supporting Biden, all of these kinds of things. And I just couldn't bear it. And I had this conversation with my partner, and I just said, I got to figure something out. This isn't going to work for me. So it was when I was away from it, I realized how absolutely, just, it's a very, it's a religion. I don't know. It's a condition. I don't know. It's something. And I was sucked in. Yeah. So it's like I saw it. So, you got a lot of cognitive dissonance there. It's like I saw it.
Yeah.
This is awful. And I felt awful walking through the halls, that I couldn't say something because I, would be taken as somebody that wasn't socially aware or justice minded, whatever.
Yeah.
So I never really made friends. And then at the same time, I'm sitting here going, the words are coming out of my mouth almost because I feel like I have to. So it was hard. I was not feeling like my authentic self here. And so I left. So, and when I quit, so, all along that time I was on disability and just looking around, I kind of, started to shift my focus, and, start to want to speak out about this. And that's when I started to look around at jobs and, positions where I could use my skill set, in a way that, we had a platform that really kind of would oppose what's happening and why it's damaging. And I happened to find an organization that really aligned with that. And so I made a video for them. But before that, I did resign to the provost. And I was actually very honest. I told them why I was resigning, that I don't support these values that they're insisting that I teach or incorporate. And their response was, well, a lot of the professors don't, but we have to do something about diversity. So what we have.
Wow.
That was
what they responded with.
Yeah, that was a response. And I was I was bummed I didn't record it, but it
was verbally told to you then.
I was verbally told by the provost. Again, I cannot prove this because I didn't record it, but that was sickening to me. So you're telling me other professors say this and other professors talk about this, and they're concerned that this is not the way to approach, issues of diversity and whatever. And you're doing it anyway because
that sounds like, did you watch the conversation with Neil? He talked about that in his program. I don't know if you know Neil from CTA.
No, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not as connected.
He talked about that. He complained to the administration. He wrote a letter about how he couldn't continue in his counseling program, and the response that he received from the founder, I believe, of the school was, I don't agree with it either, but we have to do it in order to keep our funding. And so
there you go.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
I know. It sounds just like what you were told. I mean,
wow. That word for word.
Yeah.
Because they ended up getting a whole bunch of money during the kind of the COVID thing or whatever, and grants that they had never had before. Those grants and that money most likely came with conditions.
This is what I've wondered too. The HERF fund, the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. I've wondered, I've looked through it. I'm trying to find, is there something in here that requires the schools who accept this to push this stuff? Because it ramped up so significantly.
Yeah, I believe so. I will say I do not have that written on paper anywhere. I don't
either.
Have it recorded anywhere, but that's my sense because of the way that he talked about, we don't really have any other way to integrate diversity or whatever into these programs. We need something. So this is the best we've got.
Yeah.
So I assume that funding has to do with it quite a bit. And then so then it folds into this politics piece, which then becomes a bigger kind of chaotic umbrella. And you know what, I'm going to say this, even with the vaccine situation, so you were not allowed on campus if you weren't going to be vaccinated. And I was not going to be vaccinated and I didn't. And they eventually removed the mandate, actually. Interestingly enough, I was surprised because most higher, education institutions kept it for at least much longer. But it was initially, voluntary. And then it was, we're doing a survey and, for the comfort level of everyone. And then it was, okay, it's going to be required. And they created a database center for you to upload all of your stuff and keep it. Yeah. So that to me, the emails that went out about that was, we are so excited that it is now our turn to go get these shots. And we're so excited that, we are out here saving humanity from COVID. I mean, it was crazy. I can't believe I didn't save this stuff. We're doing our moral
from them as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, I have those, and I have one where I wrote to the chancellor, Bill Groves, and I said, I'm really concerned about the tone of this vaccine thing. I don't want my school mandating my medical care. And he gave me his assurance that they would never do such a thing. They would never do that. He wrote that in an email. We would never do that. And then I sent that back to him when they sent out the one mandating it. So
did he respond to that?
Yeah, he did. Actually, it's quite a chain. I can maybe post those sometime if people want to see them. I could put them on.
I think people would love to see them. I'm just going to say.
There's a big back and forth there.
Yeah.
I know we both have an out right now. We both have stuff to do, but I feel like we've just barely touched on what we need to talk about. I hope maybe we can do this again next week.
Yes.
Let's set up a time and we'll talk about it.
Great. Yeah. Perfect. That sounds great. This was so much fun. And I would absolutely love to let's just chat again.
Okay. Awesome. And I thank you so much thank you for sharing that. I feel like you just opened it up and I have so many questions. And so I can't wait to talk some more.
This is great. Well, it's been so wonderful being with you today. So I'm totally honored and privileged that, you invited me to come and do this.
Same. I'm so grateful to you. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. And I look forward to continuing it.
Sounds good. All right.